The hangar bay fell silent as the impossible aircraft touched down with surprising grace. Its landing gear, clearly retrofitted with advanced shock absorbers and magnetic clamps, secured the A-10 to the deck with mechanical precision. Steam hissed from cooling vents that definitely hadn't been part of the original design, and the distinctive whine of the Ju-8 cannon's motor could be heard spinning down. General Hayes walked toward the aircraft. Flanked by his senior staff and a full security detail, the A-10's canopy slid back with a pneumatic hiss revealing its pilot. She was perhaps 30 years old with short black hair, and the kind of steady gaze that came from someone who had looked death in the face and found it lacking. When she stood up in the cockpit, Hayes could see she wore a flight suit that was part military standard, part custom engineering marvel. Captain Elena Vasquez, she announced, vaulting down from the cockpit with the fluid motion of someone comfortable with low gravity. Independent contractor, currently unemployed, and the only person in human space who can solve your Zephyrian problem. Admiral Reeves stepped forward, his expression skeptical. Captain, with all due respect, that aircraft shouldn't even be capable of atmospheric flight anymore, let alone interstellar travel. The A-10 was retired from active service over 2 centuries ago. Elena smiled, patting the aircraft's nose with obvious affection. The Warthog never retires, Admiral. She just gets better with age. She gestured toward the clearly modified engine nacelles. Quantum vacuum drives replacing the old turbofans. Antimatter containment pods where the fuel tanks used to be, and a few other improvements I've made over the years. Colonel Chen circled the aircraft, her trained eye taking in the modifications. The cannon appeared unchanged, but the ammunition feeds had been completely redesigned. Strange crystalline structures jutted from hardpoints where missiles would normally hang, and the entire hull showed signs of extensive armor upgrades. The records show Captain Elena Vasquez died in a mining accident on Titan 7 years ago, Chen said quietly, consulting her datapad. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Elena replied with a shrug. Though the mining accident part was accurate. Zephyrian scout ship tried to claim the Titan hydrogen extraction facility. I was the only pilot on site when they attacked. General Hayes felt pieces clicking into place. The Zephyrians had been probing human space for years before their recent aggressive expansion. Most encounters had been dismissed as equipment failures or natural phenomena, but a few had left traces. You fought them before, Hayes stated rather than asked. Elena nodded grimly. Watched them take apart our defense platforms like they were made of paper. Their adaptive shielding made our plasma cannons useless after the first few shots. But you know what they hadn't adapted to? Depleted uranium rounds traveling at 3,900 rounds per minute. She slapped the side of her aircraft again, and Hayes could hear the pride in her voice. The Gateway Avenger cannon, designed to punch through Soviet tank armor with the subtlety of a meteor strike. Turns out Zephyrian biomechanical hulls don't adapt well to having their molecular structure physically shredded by tungsten core ammunition. One aircraft against an entire invasion force? Admiral Reeves asked skeptically. One very angry pilot with a very big gun, Elena corrected. The Zephyrians think in terms of energy patterns and technological adaptation. They can't conceive of a species that would strap a cannon to an aircraft and call it good enough. To them, it's like showing up to a chess match with a sledgehammer. Elena climbed back onto her aircraft and began pointing out various modifications. After Titan, I spent 7 years hunting their scout ships across the outer rim. Every engagement taught me more about how they think, how they adapt, how they fail to adapt. I've been preparing for this moment. The crystalline structures on the hardpoints caught Hayes' attention. They pulsed with a faint inner light that seemed almost organic. What are those? Zephyrian shield generators, Elena replied casually, as if discussing the weather. Salvaged from their ships and reverse engineered. Took me 4 years to figure out how to make them work with human technology. They provide limited protection, but more importantly, they make my Warthog invisible to their bioscanners. Colonel Chen's eyebrows rose. You've been flying with their own technology? Know your enemy, Elena said simply. The Zephyrians are brilliant at technological adaptation, but they have a fundamental weakness. They can't comprehend technological regression. To them, older means inferior. They see an A-10 and dismiss it as primitive, not recognizing that sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one. She jumped down from the aircraft and walked to a storage locker she had apparently installed in the landing gear bay. From it, she withdrew a data crystal that flickered with the same purple light they had seen in the Zephyrian transmissions. I've spent 7 years mapping their fortress designs, studying their tactical patterns and learning their weaknesses. They took Kepler 442b because it's not just a mining station. It's a testing ground for a new type of biomechanical integration. If they succeed there, they'll have the technology to convert entire human populations in a matter of hours. General Hayes felt his blood chill. The implications were staggering. How do we stop them? Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. We don't fight their strengths. We exploit their assumptions. They expect you to attack their shields with energy weapons. They expect you to use tactics from your military academies. They expect you to behave like civilized human beings. She paused, her eyes taking on a dangerous glint. What they don't expect is a suicidal pilot in a 200-year-old ground attack aircraft flying straight down their throat while screaming the song of her people. Admiral Reeves looked alarmed. Captain, I can't authorize a suicide mission. Who said anything about suicide? Elena laughed, a sound that somehow made the hangar feel warmer. Admiral, you're thinking like a modern human. All tactical precision and measured responses. Sometimes you need to think like an old human, crude, direct, and absolutely committed to the idea that if something is in your way, you go through it rather than around it. She activated the data crystal, and a 3-dimensional map of the Zephyrian fortress appeared above it. Their fortress has one weakness they don't even know about. They built it using their own biomechanical principles, which means it has a nervous system, a central processing core that coordinates all their adaptive defenses. It's buried deep inside, protected by layers of shielding and automated defenses. Elena pointed to a specific location on the map. But like any nervous system, if you apply enough localized trauma, the whole system goes into shock. The GAU-8 cannon can deliver exactly that kind of trauma. I punch through their shields during their adaptation delay, fly down their central corridor, and put 1,000 rounds of depleted uranium into their brain before they even realize I'm there. General Hayes studied the map, his tactical mind automatically calculating distances and defensive positions. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of human audacity that had carried their species from cave paintings to starships in 10,000 years. What do you need from us? He asked quietly. Elena's grin widened. Exactly what you'd give any human about to do something impossible, General. A distraction loud enough to wake the dead, and someone to play my theme music while I show these aliens why humanity chose the warthog as one of our greatest ambassadors to the universe. 2 hours later, the human fleet arranged itself in attack formation around the Zephyrian fortress. General Hayes watched from the bridge as Elena performed her final pre-flight checks, her modified A-10 sitting in the launch bay like a predator preparing to strike. The plan was audacious even by human standards, but every instinct Hayes had developed over 3 decades of command told him it might actually work. All ships report ready, Colonel Chen announced. Nuclear torpedoes armed, plasma batteries charged, and fighter squadrons prepared for engagement. Elena's voice crackled over the comm system from her cockpit. Remember, the moment their shields start adapting to your weapons, you need to switch to something completely different. Keep them guessing, keep them analyzing, and most importantly, keep them looking at you instead of at the small angry woman in the antique aircraft. Admiral Reeves activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All units, this is Operation Thunderbolt. Our objective is to create the loudest, most chaotic distraction in military history. Make them think we're throwing everything we have at them, because we are. The first wave of nuclear torpedoes streaked toward the fortress, their drives painting brilliant lines across the vacuum. The Zephyrian defensive systems responded immediately, energy barriers flaring to life and interceptor drones swarming out to meet the incoming threats. The torpedoes detonated in brilliant flashes against the barriers, their fusion fires washing harmlessly over the adaptive shields. Shields adapting to nuclear signatures, the tactical officer reported. They're already strengthening against similar attacks. Phase 2, Hayes ordered. All ships open fire with plasma batteries. Beams of superheated matter lanced out from dozens of human warships, striking the fortress from multiple angles. For a moment, the barriers flickered as they adapted to the new threat. Then they solidified again, now tuned to deflect both nuclear and plasma-based attacks. Elena's A-10 dropped out of the launch bay at that exact moment, its modified engines accelerating it toward the fortress with surprising speed. The Zephyrian bioscanners swept past her repeatedly, detecting nothing more threatening than an ancient atmospheric aircraft that posed no conceivable threat to their space-based defenses. Ghost Rider is in the pipe, Elena reported, her voice calm despite flying directly toward what was essentially a mobile mountain of alien death. Defensive patterns look exactly like my projections. They're treating me like space debris. General Hayes watched her approach on the tactical display, a single small blip moving toward certain destruction. Around the fortress, the battle continued to intensify. Human ships launched everything in their arsenals: kinetic penetrators, antimatter warheads, gravitational distortion weapons, and exotic particles that most of the crew couldn't even pronounce. Each new weapon type caused momentary disruption in the Zephyrian shields as they adapted, but within seconds the barriers were stronger than before. It was like watching humanity's best technology being systematically dismantled and improved upon by an enemy that learned faster than they could innovate. "Sir, we're losing ships," Admiral Reeves reported grimly. The USS Meridian took a direct hit from their bioelectric cannons. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. But the distraction was working. Every Zephyrian defensive system was focused on the fleet, analyzing weapon signatures and adapting countermeasures. Their biomechanical sensors were overwhelmed by the massive energy signatures from the attacking ships, completely blind to one small aircraft that registered as nothing more than metallic debris. Elena's approach vector took her through the outer perimeter of automated defense platforms. Normally, these would have vaporized anything approaching the fortress, but they were designed to respond to threats their sensors could identify, and A-10 Warthogs simply didn't exist in their threat database. 20 seconds to intercept, Elena announced. Beginning attack run. Through the view screen, Hayes could see her aircraft diving toward the fortress's main docking bay, a cavernous opening designed to accommodate the massive bioships the Zephyrians used for planetary assault. It was easily large enough for her to fly through, but it was also defended by energy barriers and automated systems that should have destroyed her instantly. Instead, something remarkable happened. The Zephyrian shield generators Elena had salvaged and integrated into her aircraft created a resonance effect with the fortress's own barriers. For a few crucial seconds, her Warthog appeared to be one of their own ships returning from a mission. "I'm through the outer defenses," Elena reported, her voice tight with concentration. "Beginning interior navigation. Their bio-corridors are exactly where I predicted them to be." Inside the fortress, Elena's aircraft banked sharply through passages that seemed to pulse with organic life. The walls themselves were covered in the same biomechanical integration technology the Zephyrians used on their human prisoners. Conduits that looked like arteries carried energy throughout the structure, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with microscopic organisms. Her target was the central processing core, buried deep within the fortress where the Zephyrians believed it was absolutely safe. To reach it, she had to navigate through a maze of passages that were never designed for aircraft, let alone human ones. "Contact front," Elena announced as the first automated defenses within the fortress detected her presence. "They're finally figuring out that I don't belong here." Biomechanical turrets emerged from the walls, weapons that fired streams of corrosive organisms designed to dissolve enemy ships at the molecular level. Elena's response was purely human in its directness. She opened fire with the GAU-8 cannon. The sound of the 30mm rotary cannon firing inside the enclosed space was indescribable. Each depleted uranium round punched through biomechanical armor like it was paper, and the rate of fire was so intense that the turret simply disintegrated under the sustained barrage. "The beautiful thing about ballistic weapons," Elena explained over the comm, her voice nearly drowned out by the cannon fire, "is that they don't care about energy shields, adaptive armor, or biomechanical integration. Physics is physics. And physics says that when something moving very fast meets something that isn't, the something that isn't loses." She banked around a corner, her aircraft's modified maneuvering systems allowing her to navigate the tight passages with the precision of a fighter pilot and the determination of someone who had been planning this moment for 7 years. Behind her, alarms began to wail throughout the fortress as the Zephyrians finally realized they had an intruder. "Ghost Rider, be advised you have multiple contacts converging on your position," Colonel Chen warned from the fleet. "Bioships launching from secondary bays." "Let them come," Elena replied, her voice carrying the same grim satisfaction Hayes had heard from Marines about to charge an enemy position. "I've got 5,000 rounds of ammunition and approximately 30 seconds until I reach their central nervous system." This is about to become a very short conversation. The central processing core appeared ahead of her, a massive organic structure that pulsed with purple energy. It was beautiful in an alien way, like a technological brain that had been grown rather than built. Around it, Zephyrian bioships were moving to intercept her, their weapons charging for what should have been an easy kill. Elena's response was to angle her nose directly at the processing core and push her throttles to maximum. "Tell my story," she announced over the comm. "Tell them that when the aliens came for humanity, humanity sent them a 200-year-old ground attack aircraft with a message written in depleted uranium." The gay U-8 cannon spun up to full speed, its distinctive sound echoing through the fortress like the voice of human determination itself. In seconds, Elena would either succeed in her impossible mission or become another casualty of humanity's war against the stars. But as General Hayes watched her final approach, he realized that whether she succeeded or failed, she had already accomplished something remarkable. She had reminded every human watching that their species had never solved problems by accepting limitations. Elena's Gaiu-8 cannon unleashed hell into the central processing core. 3,900 rounds per minute of depleted uranium tore through the organic structure like a chainsaw through silk. Purple energy erupted in violent cascades as critical systems failed, and the fortress's biomechanical harmonics screamed in frequencies that human ears couldn't detect, but human souls somehow felt. For 17 glorious seconds, it looked like the impossible plan was working. The fortress's adaptive shields flickered and died as their controlling intelligence reeled from the brutal physical trauma. Secondary explosions rippled through, biomechanical conduits as Elena's sustained cannon fire reduced the processing core to organic, paste and twisted metal. Then everything went wrong. In a uniquely human way, "Elena, you need to get out of there now," General Hayes shouted over the comm as new readings flooded his tactical displays. "The fortress isn't shutting down. It's changing." The Zephyrian structure began to convulse like a wounded animal, but instead of dying, it was transforming. The biomechanical systems Elena had damaged weren't failing. They were evolving. Where her depleted uranium rounds had torn through organic circuits, new pathways were forming, different and stranger than before. "Well, this is unexpected," Elena muttered, banking her A-10 hard to avoid a tentacle-like appendage that had just sprouted from what used to be a wall. Their backup systems aren't technological. They're biological. The fortress is literally growing new organs to replace the ones I just shot to pieces. Through the view screen of his flagship, Hayes watched in fascination and horror as the alien fortress began to reshape itself. The smooth biomechanical surfaces developed armor plating that looked disturbingly similar to the A-10's titanium hull. Weapon ports emerged that bore an unsettling resemblance to rotary cannons. "Admiral," Colonel Chen called out, her voice tight with concern. "The fortress is mimicking Elena's attack patterns. It's trying to adapt her own tactics." Elena's laugh crackled over the comm, tinged with the kind of manic humor that emerged when humans faced the impossible and decided to treat it as a personal challenge. "They're trying to outhuman the humans. This should be interesting." The fortress's new biomechanical weapons opened fire, but something was fundamentally wrong with their attempt at mimicry. The organic rotary cannons fired bursts of crystalline projectiles that shattered harmlessly against Elena's aircraft. They had copied the form of her weapon but completely missed its function. "That's the problem with adaptive intelligence," Elena explained, weaving through the ineffective fire while simultaneously plotting her next move. "They can copy what they see, but they don't understand why it works. They think the GAU-8 is effective because it spins and makes noise. They missed the part about depleted uranium traveling at supersonic velocities. But the fortress wasn't finished adapting. New biomechanical growths were spreading across its surface, and these looked far more sophisticated than the crude weapon imitations. The aliens were learning, growing, becoming something that incorporated human aggression with their own technological superiority. "Ghost Rider, you have multiple bioships converging on your position," Admiral Reeves warned. "And they're moving faster than our previous encounters indicated." Elena checked her tactical display and swore in 3 languages, 2 of which didn't exist anymore. The Zephyrian bioships weren't just faster. They were moving with human-like unpredictability, erratic flight patterns, sudden direction changes, and aggressive attack vectors that looked suspiciously familiar. "They're flying like human pilots," she realized. "Somehow my attack damaged their central processing in a way that's making them think more like us instead of less like them." The implications hit General Hayes like a physical blow. If the Zephyrians could adapt human tactical thinking while maintaining their technological advantages, the war was effectively over. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their unpredictability, their ability to think outside conventional parameters. If their enemies could copy that, all ships knew tactical protocol, Hayes announced fleet-wide. Forget everything you learned in the academy. Forget standard operating procedures. From this moment forward, we fight like pirates, mercenaries, and desperate humans with nothing left to lose. It was the kind of order that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Admiral Reeves understood immediately and began issuing orders that would have made their instructors weep. USS Constitution. Ram that bioship at full speed, then detonate your reactor core. USS Prometheus. Target their weapon systems with your garbage disposal units. All fighter squadrons, ignore formation flying and attack like you're in a bar fight. Elena's voice cut through the chaos as she continued to evade the pursuing bioships inside the fortress. General, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that my attack worked better than expected. Their central processing core is completely destroyed. And the bad news? Hayes asked, though he suspected he already knew. The bad news is that destroying their central intelligence didn't kill the fortress. It freed it. Every individual biomechanical component is now operating independently, making its own decisions based on what it learned from watching us. We didn't fight one intelligent enemy. We just created 10,000 smaller intelligent enemies. Through the view screen, Hayes could see the truth of her words. The fortress was no longer a single coordinated structure. It was becoming something like a swarm. Individual components breaking away and operating with their own tactical awareness. Some were copying human ship designs. Others were experimenting with hybrid approaches that combined the worst aspects of both species' military thinking. Elena's A-10 burst out of the fortress's main docking bay, trailing biomechanical pursuers that looked like they had been designed by humans with serious anger management issues. Her aircraft had taken damage. One engine was smoking and her starboard wing showed signs of biomechanical corrosion. Elena, status report, Hayes demanded. Oh, I'm fantastic, she replied with the kind of cheerful sarcasm that only humans seemed capable of producing under mortal stress. My aircraft is partially dissolved. I'm being chased by aliens that think like drunk Marines, and I just turned our enemy's greatest weakness into their greatest strength. But on the positive side, I've proved that human stubbornness is a transmissible disease. The pursuing bioships opened fire with weapons that were definitely not standard Zephyrian designs. Some fired streams of what looked like liquid metal. Others launched projectiles that moved in spirals, and one appeared to be trying to ram her while screaming audibly through its biomechanical hull. They're not just copying our tactics, Elena observed, pulling a maneuver that would have been impossible for any aircraft not designed around a massive cannon. They're copying our attitudes. That one bioship just tried to headbutt me while yelling. I think I broke their species. General Hayes realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had accidentally created the first truly hybrid intelligence, alien technology with human psychology. The Zephyrians had become something that was neither fully alien nor fully human, but instead represented the chaotic middle ground between ordered technological adaptation and pure human bloody-mindedness. All units. New objective, Hayes announced. We're no longer fighting to rescue the mining station. We're fighting to contain a new form of life that thinks like us but has access to technology we can't match. This is no longer a rescue mission. This is damage control on a galactic scale. Elena's laugh carried over the comm one more time as she led her pursuers into the middle of the human fleet formation. General, I think you're finally starting to understand the scope of what we've accomplished here. We didn't just win or lose a battle. We accidentally created a new species, and they've inherited humanity's most dangerous characteristic. Which is? Hayes asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. The absolute refusal to accept that anything is impossible, Elena replied as she prepared to make the kind of tactical decision that only humans would consider reasonable. Now watch me teach these hybrid aliens why humans strap the biggest possible gun to everything we build. The situation deteriorated rapidly once the hybrid bioships reached the main battle area. Elena watched from her damaged cockpit as ships that had been designed by millions of years of Zephyrian evolution began fighting with the tactical subtlety of humans who had just been insulted in a bar. The results were both terrifying and absurdly entertaining. USS Meridian, You have a bioship attempting to ram you while firing all weapons, Colonel Chen reported, her voice maintaining professional calm despite describing what amounted to an alien temper tantrum with plasma cannons. Confirmed, came the reply from the Meridian's captain. It's also broadcasting what appears to be profanity in 17 different languages, including 2 that went extinct before human spaceflight. Elena shook her head as she maneuvered through the chaos, her damaged A-10 somehow still functional, despite looking like it had been through a blender. This is what happens when you give advanced alien technology the emotional maturity of a species that considers hold my beer and watch this to be a valid tactical doctrine, but the hybrid bioships weren't just acting human. They were learning to act human at an accelerated rate. Elena watched one of them execute a perfect barrel roll to avoid incoming fire, then immediately attempt a maneuver so recklessly aggressive that it violated several laws of physics and succeeded anyway. General, Admiral Reeves called out, his voice tight with concern. We've got a bigger problem. The bioships that broke off from the fortress aren't just fighting us. They're fighting each other. Through the main view screen, the command crew watched in fascination as groups of hybrid bioships engaged in what could only be described as internecine warfare. Some had formed loose squadrons and were attempting coordinated attacks, while others had gone completely rogue and were attacking anything that moved, including their own former allies. They've inherited human tribal instincts, Elena observed, diving under a bioship that was simultaneously trying to ram her and broadcast what sounded like a sports chant. They're not working as a unified force anymore. They're forming factions, developing rivalries, and generally behaving like humans who've been given spaceships and told to sort things out among themselves. The implications were staggering. Elena's attack hadn't just damaged the Zephyrian fortress. It had accidentally triggered the galactic equivalent of a species-wide identity crisis. The biomechanical components were trying to figure out what it meant to be individual entities instead of parts of a larger whole, and they were using human psychology as their reference manual. Sir, we're receiving multiple communications from different bioship groups, the communications officer reported, his voice cracking slightly. They're asking us to pick sides in their conflicts. General Hayes rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building that was probably going to last for decades. What kind of conflicts? Well, sir, one group wants to paint their ships red because they believe it makes them faster. Another group insists that blue is the superior color for both speed and accuracy. A third group has decided that the entire color debate is irrelevant and has declared war on both of the other groups for wasting time on aesthetics instead of focusing on weapon modifications. Elena's laughter crackled over the comm. Oh, this is beautiful. We've accidentally created the galaxy's first alien civil war, based entirely on human aesthetic preferences. They're having arguments about paint jobs while fighting for their lives. But the situation was becoming more complex by the minute. Some of the hybrid bioships had apparently concluded that the best way to become more human was to form alliances with actual humans. Elena found herself being escorted by a bioship that had somehow learned to fly in formation and was broadcasting friendly greetings in what sounded like a cross between formal Zephyrian diplomatic protocol and human military. It's like, this is bioship designation, call me Steve, came a voice over the comm that was definitely artificial but trying very hard to sound casual. I have concluded that the red-painted faction is inferior to the blue-painted faction, and I wish to offer my services to the human fleet in exchange for strategic advice and possibly some guidance on appropriate victory. Celebrations. Admiral Reeves stared at the communications console as if it had just started, speaking ancient Greek. Did that alien ship just ask us for tactical advice? Affirmative, Human Admiral, Steve replied enthusiastically. I have observed that humans possess superior techniques for expressing displeasure with enemy forces. I wish to learn what you call trash talk and apply it to combat situations. Elena guided her damaged A-10 toward the human flagship, her bioship escort maintaining perfect formation, while apparently trying to learn human flight patterns through direct observation. General, we need to talk. This situation is escalating beyond anything we planned for. Agreed, Hayes replied, watching as more bioships began approaching the human fleet with what appeared to be requests for alliance, advice, or in one case, a formal challenge to single combat to determine which species had the superior understanding of tactical aggression. Elena landed in the main hangar with slightly less grace than before, her aircraft systems showing the strain of combat against enemies that fought with the unpredictability of humans but the technology of a species that had mastered interstellar warfare when humanity was still discovering fire. She climbed out of her cockpit to find General Hayes waiting for her, along with most of his senior staff and what appeared to be a delegation of biomechanical entities that had somehow managed to miniaturize themselves enough to fit through the airlock. Captain Vasquez, one of the biomechanical entities, announced in a voice that was trying very hard to sound authoritative. I am acting temporary provisional leader Jeff, representing the blue faction of hybrid bioships committed to rational discourse and superior firepower. We wish to propose an alliance against the red faction, who are clearly inferior due to their poor choice in hull coloration and their refusal to acknowledge the tactical superiority of our newly developed ramming techniques. Elena looked at General Hayes, who looked back at her with the expression of a man who had just realized that his career was going to be remembered as the time humanity accidentally created an entire species of military allies who thought like caffeinated Marines with access to technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level. General, Elena said slowly, I think we need to revise our mission parameters. We're not fighting the Zephyrians anymore. We're not even rescuing the mining station, because I'm pretty sure the mining station is now part of an entirely different conflict that involves paint, preferences, and philosophical debates about the nature of existence. She gestured toward the biomechanical delegation, who were apparently engaged in a heated discussion about whether humans would make better allies or better teachers, for what one of them kept referring to as the art of creative destruction. What we're dealing with now, Elena continued, is the galactic equivalent of adopting 10,000 highly intelligent, heavily armed teenagers who think we're the coolest species in the galaxy and want to learn everything we know about being aggressively unreasonable in the face of impossible odds. General Hayes closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, his expression carried the kind of resigned determination that had carried humanity through every major crisis in their history. Recommendations, Captain? Elena grinned, and Hayes realized that despite everything that had gone wrong, she was enjoying herself. Well, General, we've got two choices. We can try to contain this situation and spend the next century dealing with hybrid aliens who fight like humans, but with better technology. Or we can embrace the chaos and teach them to be the best damn humans they can be. And which option do you recommend? Elena's grin widened. General, we just accidentally created a species that combines human stubbornness with alien technology. I say we teach them everything we know about being human and then point them at our enemies. What's the worst that could happen? General Hayes made the decision that would define the next era of galactic politics in approximately 30 seconds. Looking at the assembled biomechanical delegation, who were now arguing about whether humans preferred symmetrical or asymmetrical ship designs, he realized that trying to contain this situation was like trying to put a hurricane back in a bottle. Captain Vasquez, he announced, implement Operation Organized Chaos. We're going to teach these hybrid aliens everything we know about being human, starting with the most important lesson. Which is? Elena asked, though her grin suggested she already knew. When you accidentally create a new species, you take responsibility for raising them properly. Within 6 hours, the human fleet had been transformed into what could only be described as the galaxy's first interspecies military academy. Elena found herself leading orientation sessions for bioships that were eager to learn human tactical doctrines, while Admiral Reeves attempted to explain the concept of chain of command to entities that had recently discovered the joy of individual decision-making. Lesson 1. Elena announced to a group of hybrid bioships that had designated themselves Alpha Squadron, humans don't just fight to win, we fight to make a point, and that point is usually that whoever picked a fight with us seriously underestimated our capacity for creative problem-solving. Bioship Steve, who had apparently become the unofficial spokesperson for the blue faction, responded with what could only be described as enthusiasm. Understood, Instructor Elena. We have observed that humans excel at what you call making it up as you go along. We wish to master this technique. Meanwhile, the original Zephyrian fortress continued to present a problem. The structure had now completely transformed into something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of alien engineers who had been exposed to too much human engineering philosophy. It bristled with weapons that seemed to have been installed with no regard for efficiency or conventional design principles. The fortress is still holding our people, Colonel Chen reported during the daily briefing, but it's no longer behaving like a Zephyrian installation. Our bioship allies report that it's broadcasting contradictory messages in multiple languages, including what appears to be recruitment advertisements for 3 different military organizations that don't exist. Elena studied the tactical displays showing the fortress's current configuration. It's confused, she realized. The fortress's biomechanical systems are trying to decide whether they want to be Zephyrian, human, or something entirely new. They're having an identity crisis at the architectural level. Can we use that? General Hayes asked. Oh, absolutely. Elena replied with the kind of confidence that had gotten humanity into more trouble than any other species in galactic history. We just need to help them make up their minds. And I know exactly how to do it. The plan Elena proposed was so fundamentally human that the biomechanical allies took 3 hours just to understand the basic concept. It involved psychological warfare, cultural anthropology, and what Elena cheerfully described as aggressive friendship. We're going to teach the fortress to be human, she explained to the assembled fleet commanders and bioship representatives. Not by force, but by example. We're going to show them what human civilization looks like when it's working properly. Admiral Reeves looked skeptical. Captain, that fortress is still holding 10,000 human prisoners. How do we demonstrate civilization while they're being held hostage? Elena's response was to pull up a communications array and begin broadcasting toward the fortress. Attention, confused biomechanical fortress entity. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the human military, and I'm here to offer you something that the Zephyrians never could. What's that? Came a reply from the fortress, spoken in a voice that seemed to be trying out different accents and languages randomly. A choice, Elena said simply. You can continue being a fortress designed to hold prisoners and process them into something they don't want to become. Or you can become something new. Something that combines the best aspects of human and Zephyrian civilization instead of the worst. The response was immediate and chaotic. Multiple voices from the fortress began speaking at once, each representing different biomechanical systems that were apparently voting on Elena's proposal. The debate that followed was conducted in 17 languages and covered topics ranging from architectural aesthetics to the philosophical implications of voluntary association. Bioship. Steve translated for the human command staff. They are asking whether humans would accept a fortress that wishes to become a city. They want to know if it is possible to transform from a military installation into a civilian habitat. Elena looked at General Hayes, who was beginning to understand the scope of what they were accidentally creating. Not just a new species, but an entire new approach to galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation instead of forced compliance. Tell them yes, Hayes said quietly. Tell them that humans have been transforming military installations into civilian communities for thousands of years. And tell them we'll help them learn how. What followed was the most unique siege in military history. Instead of attacking the fortress, the human fleet surrounded it with construction ships, cultural exchange vessels, and what Elena insisted on calling friendship frigates. The biomechanical systems within the fortress began reconfiguring themselves, not under external pressure, but because they wanted to see what they could become. The human prisoners, who had been expecting rescue or death, found themselves in the middle of an architectural revolution. The cells and processing chambers were being converted into living spaces and community areas by biomechanical systems that kept asking them for input on design preferences. This is Civilian Administrator Johnson, came a transmission from inside the fortress. I'm reporting that our captors have apparently decided to become our landlords. They're asking us to vote on whether we prefer natural lighting or artificial illumination, and they want to know if we have any dietary restrictions they should consider when planning the new food production facilities. Elena's laugh carried across the bridge. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just accomplished something that will be remembered for the next 1,000 years. We didn't conquer an enemy fortress. We convinced it to become a friendly neighborhood. But the transformation was far from complete. As the fortress reconfigured itself into something resembling a space-based city, reports began coming in from across human space. Other Zephyrian installations had detected the changes and were apparently debating among themselves whether to follow the fortress's example or resist the new paradigm. "General," Colonel Chen announced, "we're receiving communications from 14 different Zephyrian installations. They're all asking the same question, which is, they want to know if the offer of voluntary transformation is available to other facilities, and whether humans would be willing to serve as cultural advisors for the process." Elena turned to look at General Hayes with an expression that combined triumph, exhaustion, and the kind of manic joy that humans experienced when they realized they had accidentally solved a problem in the most complicated way possible. "General," she said, "I think we need to revise our mission parameters one more time. We're not fighting a war anymore. We're apparently starting a cultural revolution that's going to transform the entire galactic political structure." Hayes nodded slowly, watching through the view screen as the former fortress continued its transformation, its biomechanical components working alongside human engineers to create something that had never existed before. A truly hybrid civilization that combined the best aspects of multiple species. "Captain Vasquez," he said finally, "when this mission started, you told me that the word impossible doesn't mean what our enemies think it does." "Yes, sir. I'm beginning to think it doesn't mean what we thought it meant either." 6 months later, General Hayes stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Zephyrian Fortress and was now officially designated as New Harmony Station, the first hybrid biomechanical city in galactic history. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see human children playing in gardens that had been grown rather than built, while biomechanical entities that had chosen names like Bob and Susan tended to crystalline flowers that sang in harmonious frequencies. Elena joined him at the window, her A-10 Warthog now permanently retired and displayed in the station's museum. As the aircraft that had accidentally started a galactic revolution, she wore civilian clothes for the first time in years. Having accepted a position as Director of Interspecies Cultural Exchange, a job title that hadn't existed before she created the need for it. Final casualty reports came in today, she announced, holding a data pad that contained information no military strategist had ever expected to compile. Total human losses, 47 personnel. Total Zephyrian losses, 0. Total enemy installations destroyed, 0. Total enemy installations voluntarily converted to hybrid civilian communities, 137. Hayes shook his head in amazement. "We fought a war where nobody died and everybody won. How is that even possible?" "Because we remembered something that most galactic civilizations forget," Elena replied, watching as a group of hybrid bioships performed what appeared to be synchronized swimming in the vacuum around the station. "The best way to defeat an enemy is to convince them to become your friend." The transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Zephyrian biomechanical technology, when freed from its original purpose of forced assimilation, had proven remarkably adaptable to civilian applications. Cities that could grow themselves, ships that formed emotional bonds with their crews, and manufacturing systems that took genuine pride in the quality of their products. The Galactic Council is still trying to figure out how to classify the new hybrid communities, Elena continued. They've created a new category called Voluntary Cooperative Biomechanical Democracies, which is probably the most bureaucratic way possible to say places where humans and aliens decided to get along really well. Admiral Reeves approached them, carrying reports that had become far more pleasant to read over the past few months. The latest updates from the conversion sites are all positive. New Geneva Station reports successful integration of their biomechanical crop systems. Fort Friendship has completed its transformation from a military outpost to a research facility focused on developing better ice cream flavors. And Station Steve. Well, Station Steve is still Station Steve, but they've added 17 new recreational facilities and a surprisingly good jazz club. Elena grinned. Station Steve had been the first of the hybrid bioships to request permanent civilian conversion, and the resulting community had become famous throughout human space for its enthusiastic embrace of human cultural traditions, especially those involving music, recreational activities, and competitive eating contests. Through the station's communication system, they could hear the daily news broadcast being delivered by entity formerly known as Zephyrian Tactical System Alpha, who had chosen the name Patricia and had developed a remarkable talent for journalism that combined alien analytical precision with human storytelling techniques. Today marks the 6-month anniversary of what historians are calling the Voluntary Revolution. Patricia announced in a voice that had learned to convey warmth and humor. Hybrid communities across the galaxy continue to report unprecedented levels of civilian satisfaction, with crime rates approaching zero and productivity levels reaching heights that economists are describing as enthusiastically impossible. Hayes listened to the broadcast with a sense of satisfaction that went beyond military victory. They hadn't just won a war, they had accidentally created a new model for galactic civilization that was being adopted by species that had been in conflict for millennia. "Captain," he said to Elena, "when this all started, you told me that sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one. I remember. What was the simple solution here?" Elena was quiet for a moment, watching through the window as human engineers worked alongside biomechanical entities to install what appeared to be a playground that defied several laws of physics while maintaining perfect safety standards. "We treated them like people," she said finally. "Not enemies, not problems to be solved, not resources to be exploited. Just people who happened to be made of different stuff and who needed someone to show them that there were alternatives to the way they'd always done things." A chime sounded through the station, indicating an incoming transmission from Earth. General Hayes accepted the communication, and the image of the president appeared on the nearest display screen. "General Hayes." "Captain Vasquez," the president began, "I'm calling to inform you that the Galactic Council has officially recognized the Hybrid Cooperative Alliance as a legitimate governmental entity, with full membership rights and voting privileges. They've also requested that Earth serve as the primary cultural advisor for future voluntary conversion projects." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Mr. President, are you saying that humanity's official role in galactic politics is now teaching other species how to be friends?" "That appears to be an accurate summary, Captain. The Council has also voted to establish the Elena Vasquez Institute for Creative Problem Solving, which will be dedicated to finding unconventional solutions to interspecies conflicts." Hayes looked at Elena, who was trying not to laugh. "An entire institute dedicated to flying antique aircraft at alien problems until they become cooperative?" "More broadly," the president corrected, "an institute dedicated to the principle that any problem can be solved if you approach it with sufficient human stubbornness and a willingness to try solutions that nobody else would consider reasonable." After the transmission ended, Hayes and Elena stood in comfortable silence, watching the daily life of a community that shouldn't have been possible. Children who were biologically human played games with entities that were technologically alien, while their parents worked together on projects that combined the best aspects of both species' capabilities. "Elena," Hayes said finally, "do you think we've changed the galaxy permanently?" She considered the question seriously, watching as a biomechanical entity that had designated itself as the station's official storyteller gathered a group of children around what appeared to be a living sculpture that illustrated its tales with three-dimensional holograms. "General," she replied, "I think we've done something more important than changing the galaxy. We've proven that the galaxy can change itself, if you give it the right example to follow." In the distance, other stations and ships moved through space with the kind of purposeful cooperation that had never existed before. Humanity had accidentally demonstrated that enemies could become friends, that war could become peace, and that sometimes the most impossible mission was simply treating others with the kind of respect that humans took for granted. Elena's A-10 Warthog sat in its place of honor in the museum, a reminder that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones, and that the most important weapon any species could possess was the willingness to extend friendship instead of deploying force. The impossible mission had been completed, though not in any way that anyone had expected. Humanity had saved their people, defeated their enemies, and transformed the galaxy, all by remembering that the greatest human characteristic wasn't their technology or their tactics, it was their stubborn refusal to accept that anyone had to remain an enemy forever. As Elena liked to tell visitors to the museum, we didn't fight them until they surrendered. We annoyed them until they joined us. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how humans conquer the universe, one friend at a time.